Stop. Don't touch that. Eckhart Tolle, the author of The Power of Now, uncovered something that will completely shift your perspective on inner peace. It's the opposite of everything you've been taught. If your mind never seems to stop, if anxiety creeps in even when everything is going well, if you crave peace but only find more noise, then something invisible is draining your energy without you even realizing it. There are things you touch every day, thoughts you embrace, emotions you feed, and you don't know that every time you do, you're destroying your own tranquility from the inside out. But what Tolle revealed after his spiritual awakening is even more unsettling. He discovered that 99% of people not only touch what they shouldn't, but they completely identify with it. They live in a mental prison, unaware they possess the key. Today, you're going to learn exactly what to avoid if you truly want to feel peace. It's not what you imagine. It's not external circumstances. It's something far more subtle and far more powerful. Because when you stop touching that, something magical happens. Your mind calms, your body relaxes, and for the first time, you feel what Tolle calls pure presence. If you've ever wondered why meditation doesn't work, why you try to be present but your mind always wanders, why you seek happiness but find emptiness, the answer lies in what you're about to discover in the next few minutes. But first, you need to understand something fundamental. The problem isn't that your mind is too active. The problem is that you're constantly touching what generates that activity, and you don't even know it. Imagine your mind as a lake. Naturally, the water is calm, but every time you touch certain things, you generate ripples that disturb that natural serenity. And then you suffer because of the ripples, without realizing you created them. This is what most people don't understand about inner peace. It's not something you have to create. It's not something you have to search for. Peace is already there. You just need to stop disturbing it. Eckhart Tolle experienced this in the most dramatic way possible. At 29, he was on the brink of suicide. One night in his small London apartment, the suffering was so intense he thought, I can't live with myself anymore. And then something extraordinary happened. A question arose in his mind. Who is that self I can't live with? Is it me? Or am I the observer of that self? In that moment, Tolle realized something that would change his life forever. He realized he had been constantly touching his thoughts, identifying with them, believing he was his thoughts. But that night he discovered there was a space, a silent observer, that could see the thoughts without being affected by them. And when he stopped touching those tormenting thoughts, when he stopped identifying with them, the peace that had always been there revealed itself. For the next 2 years, Tolle lived in a state of profound serenity. He'd spend hours sitting on park benches, simply being. He didn't need to do anything. He didn't need to go anywhere. He had found what we all seek, unconditional peace. And the most incredible thing is that nothing had changed in his external world. His financial situation remained the same. His circumstances hadn't improved. The only thing that had changed was that he had stopped touching what disturbed his natural peace. But what exactly had he stopped touching? What was that invisible element draining his energy? And how can you identify it in your own life? The answer is simpler than you imagine, but also more radical. Because once you understand it, you'll never see your suffering the same way again. If you feel something inside you is constantly agitated, if your mind never rests, if you seek happiness, but it always slips away, it's because you're touching exactly what you shouldn't be touching. Tolle describes it this way. The ego thrives on drama. It feeds on problems. And the easiest way to create problems is to resist what is. There's the first revelation. What you shouldn't touch is your resistance to the present moment. Every time you think, this shouldn't be happening. Every time you wish something were different. Every time you mentally fight against what is. You're touching the source of all psychological suffering. It's like constantly pinching yourself and then wondering why it hurts. Most people live in a constant state of subtle resistance. They resist traffic. They resist the weather. They resist the emotions they feel. They resist the thoughts that arise. And that constant resistance generates an internal friction they interpret as anxiety, stress, or unhappiness. But here's what most don't understand. Resistance is completely invisible to the one experiencing it. It's like the air we breathe. It's there, but we don't notice it. How do you know if you're resisting? Very simple. If you feel any form of emotional discomfort, it's resistance. If you feel rushed, it's resistance. If you feel frustration, It's resistance. If you feel something is wrong, it's resistance. And the solution isn't to fight against resistance. That would be resisting the resistance. The solution is simply to stop touching it. When you observe resistance without judging it, when you see it without trying to change it, something extraordinary happens. It dissolves on its own, like ice melting when you stop squeezing it in your hand, but there's something even deeper you shouldn't touch. Something Tolle considers the root of all human suffering, and you're probably touching it hundreds of times a day without realizing it. Do you know what it is? It's your identification with the voice in your head. That voice that comments on everything, that judges everything, that plans, worries, criticizes. Most people believe that voice is them. But Tolle discovered something revolutionary. You are not that voice. You are the one who can hear that voice. When you touch that voice, when you identify with it, when you believe its opinions are the truth, you become a prisoner of your own mind. But when you stop touching it, when you simply observe it like you would watch clouds drift by, something inside you is freed. And that freedom is what Tolle calls presence. Presence isn't a concept. It's not a spiritual idea. It's your natural state when you stop touching what disturbs your peace. But there's a third thing you should never touch if you want to experience real tranquility. And this is the most treacherous of all, because it seems completely innocent. Even positive. Do you know what it is? It's your need for things to be different from how they are. Listen to this carefully. Every time you think, when I have this, I'll be happy. Every time you say, if only I could change that, everything would be all right. You're touching the deepest wellspring of human dissatisfaction. Eckhart Tolle explains it in a way that can change your life forever. The present is all you have. The present is all you are. When you reject the present, you're rejecting life itself. And here's something that will surprise you. Modern science is confirming exactly what Tolle intuited decades ago. Neuroscientists have discovered that when we resist what's happening, our brains activate the same areas that light up during physical pain. Literally, you're creating neurological suffering every time you touch your resistance to the present moment. But when you practice what Tolle calls radical acceptance, when you stop touching that compulsive need for things to be different, something extraordinary happens in your brain. The amygdala calms down. The prefrontal cortex activates. And you experience what scientists call neural coherence. That is, your brain enters a state of harmony that naturally generates peace, clarity, and well-being. But how exactly do you stop touching what you've been touching your whole life? How do you break patterns so deeply ingrained that you consider them part of your identity? Tolle developed specific techniques that anyone can apply. And they don't require years of meditation. They don't require spiritual retreats. They can work immediately if you understand how to use them. The first technique is called the silent observer. And it's so simple that most people dismiss it, but so powerful that it can transform your life experience in minutes. Here's exactly how it works. The next time you feel anxiety, frustration, or any form of discomfort, instead of trying to change that emotion, simply observe it. Don't think about it. Don't analyze it. Don't look for where it comes from. Just watch it. As if you were a neutral scientist observing an interesting phenomenon. What happens when you do this? The emotion loses its power over you. Because the moment you observe it, you're no longer identified with it. You realize that you are the space in which that emotion appears, not the emotion itself. It's like realizing that you are the sky, not the clouds passing through it. But there's something even deeper. Tolle discovered that when you stop touching your negative emotions, when you simply observe them without resisting, they not only dissolve faster, but they reveal something extraordinary beneath them. Beneath every negative emotion, there is a tranquil presence. Beneath every agitated thought, there is a living silence. Beneath all resistance, there is a natural acceptance. And that presence, that silence, that acceptance, that's what you really are. Tolle's second technique is even more radical. He calls it the death of psychological time, and it can free you from anxiety almost instantaneously. Do you know what psychological time is? It's when your mind lives in the past or the future, when you relive conversations that have already passed, when you project scenarios that haven't happened, when you live in a mental world that exists only in your head. Tolle says something that may sound extreme, but is profoundly liberating. The past no longer exists. The future doesn't yet exist. The only thing real is this moment. When you touch psychological time, when you identify with your memories or your projections, you move away from the only place where peace exists, the present. But how do you get out of psychological time? How do you return to the now when your mind is designed to constantly escape? Tolle teaches a technique so simple, it seems too easy to work, but thousands of people have transformed their lives with it. It's called feeling the inner body, and it works like this. At any time of day, no matter what you're doing, bring your attention to your body. Don't think about your body. Feel it from the inside. Feel your hands. Feel your feet. Feel your breath. Feel the subtle energy flowing through your body. Why does this work? Because your body is always in the present. Your body cannot be in the past. It cannot be in the future. It's here, now, always. When you connect with your inner body, you automatically exit psychological time and enter real time. And in real time, there is no anxiety. There is no depression. There is no fear. There is only what is. But here's the game changer. Most people practice these techniques when they feel bad, when they're in crisis, when suffering becomes unbearable. Tolle discovered something revolutionary. If you practice not touching these things when you feel good, when you're calm, you develop what he calls spiritual immunity. It's like vaccinating yourself against psychological suffering. When you train your mind not to identify with thoughts, when you train your heart not to resist emotions, when you train your being to inhabit the present, you develop an inner stability that no external circumstance can disturb. And this isn't theory. Tolle lived this transformation. After his awakening, he went through situations that would normally have generated extreme stress, financial problems, public criticism, media pressure. But because he had learned not to touch resistance, because he had developed spiritual immunity, these situations didn't affect him. Not because he ignored them, but because he had discovered a place within himself that remained at peace, no matter what happened outside. And do you know what's most extraordinary? That place also exists within you. It's not something you have to create. It's not something you have to look for. It's already there. It's just covered by everything you've been touching. But there's a fourth thing you should never touch. And this is the most subtle, the hardest to detect, and the most destructive to your inner peace. Do you know what it is? It's your self-image. That story you tell yourself about who you are. Those labels you use to define yourself. Those expectations you have about how you should be. Tolle explains it like this. The ego is a story you tell yourself about yourself. And as long as you believe in that story, you remain a prisoner of its limitations. Every time you touch that image, every time you defend that identity, every time you need to prove who you are, you generate an internal tension that you interpret as stress, insecurity, or inadequacy. Because deep down, you know that image isn't real. Deep down, you know you are much more than any mental definition. But you keep touching that false identity because you believe that without it, you would be nothing. Tolle discovered the exact opposite. When you stop touching your personal image, when you let go of the need to be someone in particular, you discover you are everything. You discover you are the very consciousness in which all identities appear and disappear. And that consciousness doesn't need to defend itself. It doesn't need to prove itself. It doesn't need validation. It simply is. The fifth thing you should never touch is your need to be right. That compulsion to prove your point. That resistance to being wrong. Have you noticed how much energy you spend defending your opinions? How much stress you generate when someone disagrees with you? How much internal turmoil you experience when you feel misunderstood? Tolle teaches something that can free you immediately. Truth doesn't need defending. What needs defending usually isn't truth. When you stop touching that compulsive need to be right, when you allow others to have different opinions without feeling threatened, something beautiful happens. Your mind calms, your heart opens, and you experience a freedom you didn't know existed. But here comes the deepest part of all. All these things you shouldn't touch: resistance, mental identity, psychological time, personal image, the need to be right, all arise from the same source.
They arise from forgetting who you really are. Tolle says it simply, yet revolutionarily. You are not a human being having a spiritual experience. You are a spiritual being having a human experience. When you remember this, when you recognize your true nature, you automatically stop touching everything that disturbs your peace. Not because you force yourself to, but because it no longer makes sense. It's like waking up from a dream.
In the dream, you were fighting monsters, but when you wake up, you realize there were never any monsters, only a dreamer dreaming. Right now, as you're listening to this, you have the opportunity to wake up. You have the opportunity to stop touching what you've been touching your whole life. Not tomorrow, not when you finish this video, right now. Simply observe if, at this moment, there's resistance to something. Observe if your mind is in the past or the future. Observe if you're defending some image of yourself. Observe if you need something to be different to feel good. And if you detect any of these things, simply stop touching them. Don't fight them. Don't analyze them. Just let them go, like opening your hand and dropping a hot stone. What remains when you stop touching all this? What remains is what has always been there. The peace that doesn't depend on circumstances. The presence that is your true nature. The love that you are when you're not pretending to be something else. Tolle completed his transformation with a realization that can change your life. You are not the content of your mind. You are the space in which that content appears. And that space, that presence, that consciousness has never been disturbed by anything. It has never been anxious. It has never suffered. It has never been incomplete. That is your true identity. That is your natural peace. That is the presence you can experience right now, simply by stopping touching what hides it. Don't touch that, and discover what you always have been. But there are even deeper layers of what you should never touch. Layers so subtle they go unnoticed even by those who practice spirituality for years. The sixth thing you shouldn't touch is your need for spiritual progress. Sounds paradoxical? Tolle discovered something that completely revolutionizes the concept of personal growth. The desire to arrive somewhere spiritually is another movement of the ego, another escape from the present. Every time you think, when I'm more spiritual, I'll be happy. Every time you seek enlightenment as if it were a future achievement. Every time you measure your progress on the path, you are touching exactly what keeps you away from what you seek. Because what you seek is already here. The presence you crave is already you. The peace you desire is already your nature. There's nowhere to arrive because you've never left. It's like looking for your glasses while you're wearing them. Tolle went through this same trap after his initial awakening. For months, part of his mind tried to recreate the experience, to maintain the state, to progress towards something higher, until he realized something fundamental. The search itself is what keeps hidden what is sought. When you stop touching that need for progress, when you stop seeking enlightenment, when you simply are, you discover that there was never anything to achieve, only something to remember. The seventh thing you should never touch is your personal history, that narrative about your past, those wounds you carry, those traumas you define as part of your identity, those achievements you use to validate yourself. Tolle explains it in a way that can instantly free you. Your past does not exist except as a memory in this moment, and you are not your memories. You are the one who can observe those memories appear and disappear. Every time you touch your personal history, every time you relive the pain, every time you identify with what happened to you, you are strengthening a false identity that keeps you prisoner of something that no longer exists. It's not about denying your experience. It's about recognizing that you are bigger than any experience. You are the conscious space in which all experiences appear. When a painful memory arises, instead of touching it, instead of reliving the story, simply observe how it appears in your consciousness, like a cloud passing through the sky. What happens when you do this? The memory loses its emotional charge, because you realize that you are not the memory. You are the one who can see the memory without being affected by it. It's like watching a horror movie and remembering that you are the spectator, not the character in danger. The eighth thing you should never touch is your need to control, that compulsion to manage every detail, that anxiety when things don't go as planned, that resistance to uncertainty. Tolle discovered something that can transform your relationship with life. Life is a dance between doing and happening. The ego wants to control everything. Presence allows life to unfold. Every time you touch that need for control, every time you tense up because something is beyond your management, every time you fight against uncertainty, you are generating an internal friction that you interpret as stress. Because deep down, you know something your mind doesn't want to admit. Most of what happens in life is completely beyond your control, and that's not a problem. It's a blessing. Imagine having to consciously control every beat of your heart, every breath, every digestive process, every cellular function, it would be exhausting and impossible. Life takes care of itself. Your body heals itself. Your mind solves problems while you sleep. The universe's intelligence operates through you without you having to micromanage every detail. When you stop touching that need for control, when you trust the greater intelligence working through you, you experience what Tolle calls action without an actor. You act when it's necessary to act. You respond when it's appropriate to respond. But there's no tense ego trying to force results. There's fluid presence allowing life to express itself through you. And here comes something extraordinary. When you stop controlling, paradoxically, you become more effective. Because you act from intuition instead of fear. You respond from wisdom instead of reactivity. It's like rowing downstream instead of upstream. You use less energy and go further. The ninth thing you should never touch is your need to be special. That subtle quest for uniqueness. That constant comparison with others. That need to stand out or be recognized. Tolle describes it like this. The ego lives on comparison. It always needs to be more than others, or less than others. It can never simply be. Every time you touch that need to be special, every time you seek external validation, every time you measure your worth by comparing yourself to others, you're feeding an identity that, by definition, can never be satisfied. Because if you're special, it means others are not. And that separation generates internal conflict. That division creates suffering. Tolle experienced this firsthand when his books became worldwide bestsellers. Suddenly, thousands of people treated him as if he were special, as if he were more enlightened, wiser, more evolved. And he noticed how part of his mind wanted to accept that specialness. He wanted to identify with that image of a spiritual teacher, but he realized something liberating. In presence, there's no one special. There's no teacher or student. There's only awareness recognizing itself. When you stop touching that need to be special, when you accept your ordinary humanity, you discover something extraordinary. You discover that ordinariness itself is sacred. That simple presence is miraculous. You don't need to be different to be valuable. You don't need to stand out to matter. Your worth doesn't come from being unique. It comes from being. The 10th thing you should never touch is your need for others to change. That frustration when people don't act as you expected. That irritation when someone doesn't understand your point of view. That need to help others awaken. Tolle teaches something that can revolutionize your relationships. Changing others is impossible. Accepting others as they are is the only path to conscious relationships. Every time you touch that need to change others, every time you get frustrated because someone doesn't evolve, every time you try to fix people, you're touching the source of all relational conflict, because you're projecting onto others your own resistance to the present. You're using others as an excuse to not accept what is. But what happens when you really stop touching this need? When you genuinely accept people as they are, without an agenda for change, without needing them to be different, something magical happens. Paradoxically, people often change themselves, not because you force them, but because your acceptance creates a safe space where they can relax and be authentic. It's like holding a bird with an open hand. If you close your hand, the bird struggles to escape. If you keep your hand open, the bird can choose to stay or leave freely. Tolle experienced this repeatedly. The people most transformed by his presence weren't those he tried to change, but those he simply accepted completely as they were. The 11th thing you should never touch is your need to understand. That mental compulsion to analyze everything. That search for rational explanations for every experience. That resistance to mystery. Tolle says something that can immediately free your mind. The need to understand is another form of resistance. Mystery doesn't need to be solved. It needs to be lived. Every time you touch that compulsive need to understand, every time your mind insists on having answers, every time you resist uncertainty, you're creating tension where there could be ow. Because life is fundamentally mysterious. Consciousness is a mystery. Love is a mystery. Existence itself is a mystery. And mysteries aren't designed to be solved by the mind. They're designed to be experienced by the whole being. When you stop touching that need to understand, when you allow mystery to be mystery, something beautiful happens. Your mind relaxes, your heart opens, and you experience what Tolle calls conscious non-knowing. It's a state where you know without knowing, where you understand without concepts, where you experience wisdom that transcends information. The 12th thing you should never touch is your fear of death. That subtle fear that underlies many anxieties. That resistance to impermanence. That clinging to personal continuity. Tolle experienced something extraordinary related to this. During his awakening, he had the clear perception that what he really was had never been born and would never die, not as a belief, but as a direct experience. Death is an illusion of the mind identified with form. When you recognize your true nature, you realize that you are what observes all forms appearing and disappearing. Every time you touch that fear of death, every time you identify with your body as if you were only that, every time you fear the end of your personal identity, you're creating a deep existential anxiety because you're trying to make permanent what is by nature transitory. When you stop touching that fear, when you accept impermanence as a natural part of existence, something profound is released. You stop clinging so intensely to life, and paradoxically, you live it more fully. It's like stopping squeezing sand in your hand. The tighter you squeeze, the more escapes. When you relax your hand, the sand remains. But here comes the deepest revelation of all. All these things you shouldn't touch. All arise from a single fundamental source. They arise from having identified your being with what you are not. Tolle sums it up in a phrase that can change everything. Suffering is identification. Peace is disidentification. When you identify with your thoughts, you suffer when the thoughts are negative. When you identify with your emotions, you suffer when the emotions are painful. When you identify with your body, you suffer when the body ages or gets sick. When you identify with your story, you suffer for what happened or didn't happen. When you identify with your future, you suffer from uncertainty. It's a heavy weight, isn't it? That anxious feeling of the unknown. But when you recognize that you are the consciousness in which all these phenomena appear, when you realize that you are the aware space that observes everything without being affected by anything, then you experience what Tolle calls unconditional freedom. Not freedom from circumstances, but freedom within circumstances. A profound difference. And that freedom is available right now. Not when you change something in your life. Not when you solve all your problems. Not when you reach some special state. Right now, this very moment. Simply observe if there's any identification happening at this moment. Notice if you're identifying with a thought, an emotion, a sensation. And if you detect it, simply stop touching it. Don't fight it. Don't analyze it. Just acknowledge, identification is happening. But I am the one who can see the identification. Therefore, I am not the identification. That simple recognition, that gentle disidentification, is all it takes to experience your true nature. And your true nature is infinite peace. It's unconditional love. It's eternal presence. Not because you have to create it, but because that's what you are when you stop touching everything that hides it. Tolle experienced this realization so deeply that it transformed not only his life, but the lives of millions of people who resonated with this simple yet revolutionary truth. And that same transformation is available to you, not as a future possibility, but as a present reality. You just have to stop touching what you've been touching and discover what you've always been. Right now, as you listen to these words, you have a choice. You can continue touching everything you've been touching for years. You can continue identifying with your thoughts, resisting the present, expecting others to change, needing to control every detail. Or you can choose something different. You can choose the freedom that Tolle discovered that night in London, the freedom that doesn't depend on circumstances, the freedom that is your birthright as a conscious being. But here's what most people don't understand. This freedom isn't a destination you arrive at after years of practice. It's your natural state when you stop doing what obscures it. It's like the sun that's always shining, even when the clouds cover it. The clouds are everything you've been touching. The sun is what you are when you stop touching them. And right now, at this precise moment, you can experience that sun. Simply observe if there's any resistance right now, any judgment, any need for something to be different. If you find it, don't touch it. Just watch it like you're observing clouds passing by. Do you feel that? That subtle calmness that appears when you stop touching the resistance? That's your true nature emerging. Toller says something that can transform your life starting today. A second of presence can undo years of identification with suffering. This could be that second for you. If this message resonated with you, if something inside you recognized these words as truth, it's because that presence Toller mentions is already awakening within you. Share this video with someone who needs to be reminded of who they truly are.
Because when you share presence, presence multiplies. Subscribe for more wisdom that doesn't seek to convince you of anything, but to remind you of everything. And before you go, try this. For just a moment, stop touching any thoughts about the future. Stop touching any memories of the past. Stop touching any need for this moment to be different. Just be. Do you feel it? That peace that needs no reason to exist? That presence that requires nothing external to be complete? That's you. That's always been you. You had just forgotten because you were touching everything else. Don't touch that, and discover you never needed to touch anything else.